Welcome to the distinguished lecture today. I think this is the first of the year, not the academic year, but for the calendar year. I'm Richard Ladner, a professor emeritus in the Paul G. Allen School of Computer Science and Engineering. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce Telly Whitney as our featured speaker today. She got her bachelor's degree at University of Utah, was not born in there, but was raised in Utah. Then she went to Caltech and got a PhD and worked in industry for about 10 years, it seems, working at Actel and Malleable Technologies. And then she founded the Grace Hopper Conference, a celebration of computing for women, with Anita Borg, who this area outside our room here is named after Anita Borg. So she's really and unfortunately she passed away quite a few years ago. In 1994, Telly became the president and CEO of the Anita Borg Institute. Is that about the right year?
2002.
2002.
The 94 is when the Hopper Conference was founded.
And then she was in that position until 2017. Good, I got that correct. And then she retired from that and is now a consultant. She gives lectures like this one all over the country, and is on several boards. I'm on one board with her, so it's really, really great. She has many awards. The Nico Haberman Award, given by the CRA, the Computing Research Association. The ACM Distinguished Service Award. And most recently, she became a fellow of the National Academy of Engineering. And she's telling me that's getting her pretty busy already. So let's welcome Telly Whitney.
Well, good afternoon. It's really an honor and privilege to be here. I am really excited. And I'm open, so you can ask questions along the way if you like, if that doesn't cause too many problems, but we'll see. But I'm excited to talk about my own experience. I'm going to be talking about my own life's lessons, in particular, the 5 C's. So what are the 5 C's? Courage, confidence, communication, courage, and creativity. I can tell you that if you adopt these 5 C's and bring them to your own life, you will have the career of your dreams. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I incorporated them into my life. But it's true. So I'm a risk taker. I'm an entrepreneur. I love creating things from scratch. And when I want to do something, finding that courage to do it is really one of the hardest pieces. A few years ago, I went to a place called Nepal. And I loved it. It's a beautiful place. There's these broad Himalayas, really high mountains. I went up to 18,000 feet. And it was really hard. But it was one of the most breathtaking views in the world. I mean, it was an incredible experience. But we didn't just walk up to 18,000 feet, step by step. And that's almost always how you get to where you need to go, is to be able to do it step by step. While I was in Nepal, there's not just beautiful mountains, there's these huge fissures. And in order to go across them, there's bridges that look like this. One of the times I was crossing this bridge, the people I was with, the trip leader, was up ahead, and I saw her. She was waving at me and saying something, which of course I couldn't hear. So I waved back, and then I looked down, and there was a yak coming at me. Which was what they were telling me, was that there was a yak coming across this bridge. And so, there was not a lot I could do. I held on for dear life, and the yak went by, and I got past it. And I will say that if you look at taking risks and really having that courage to go for it, there's often some problems along the way. And part of the job is to just deal with it and figure out how to get through it. And I got through it. I hung on. It was kind of exciting. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each of the C's and how my own life journey embraced these C's. I went to Africa, or at least 3 countries in Africa, earlier this year. And so I've incorporated a few of the pictures from that trip. And one of my favorite pictures is this male lion. He certainly embodies what I think of as having courage. You know, having the courage to take risks is the way that you get forward. And one of the earliest times where I embraced my own courage was when we created the Grace Hopper celebration. At the time, I mean, I moved to Silicon Valley. I had worked at a number of chip companies, semiconductor chip companies. That's really where my bread and butter, that was my passion. But there really were not a lot of women. So I set out to find women. At Caltech, it had been about 13% women. And so this was a real focus for me. In doing that, I hooked up, actually, Anna Carlin, who is here, was one of those people that in those early days, we were desperate for finding other women around. And I met Anna, who then moved to Washington, of course. But I also met a woman named Anita Borg. And she and I talked about that we needed to be able to celebrate the achievements of these remarkable women who were in computing. And so we decided to found a conference. Neither one of us knew much about creating a conference. I mean, this was from scratch. We had no idea, but we decided to do it. One of the key points was that we were not alone. People supported this work. And in fact, the CRA, which is the Computing Research Association, if you don't know what it is, they are a great nonprofit that supports academic institutions. And they agreed to be a fiscal sponsor for that first Grace Hopper celebration. The National Science Foundation gave us money so that we had scholarships for the students to attend the conference. And every speaker that we asked to speak at that first Grace Hopper said yes. But probably the thing that I remember the most was at the conference, it was June of 1994, Anita and I were at the hotel, and there was this stream of women coming into the hotel, more women than I'd ever seen in my entire life. And we looked down, and I knew then that this was my tribe. This was where I belonged. I should say that there are a number of other people in this room who were at that first Grace Hopper conference. Jan Cooney, who's in this front row, was there. I mean, I've worked with Jan for many years on many programs. Ed Lazowska was one of the few men. There were 500 people, most of them women, about 5 men, looking not quite sure what to do with all these women, as he can probably tell you. But it was a wild success, and it was because we had the courage to try something different. This is what the Grace Hopper celebration looks like today. This was 2019, about 26,000 people. It met a need. I mean, one of the things about taking risks is sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. And when it works, it's because it really meets a need. So this is something that people really want to have happen. If you look at what happens with the Grace Hopper celebration, I mean, at this point, it's known as a great place to recruit. There was, last I heard, well over 350 companies that are recruiting at the conference. We also had a poster session. This was often the first time that students had a place to present their technical work. It was really important. There were many community groups that are at the conference. The particular picture here was Latinas in Computing, one of the earliest community groups, and they brought people together to be able to share stories. And then we also increasingly brought executives from some of the companies that supported this work. Yes, they could recruit the students, but what were they doing within their organization? And so we founded something called the Technical Executive Forum. We had a partner program where we brought companies in. But Grace Hopper was always about the celebration. You can see that on the dance floor in this picture. People had a great time, and they celebrated just being together. It was a remarkable experience. So I ask you, as you think about you, and when I talk about the courage to take risks, who in your life encourages you to take risks? And who tells you to go for it? And if you find that you don't have anybody that you think about when I ask those questions, I'd encourage you to think about how to change that. How do you find the people that really encourage you to take the risks for what you really want to do? So the next C is confidence, and I love this picture. The cheetah just looks so confident as he is sitting there looking out over the fields. Confidence is one of those elusive qualities that people say, you need to look more confident. I remember my board telling me, you needed to have executive presence, and I think, I don't know what that means. What does that even mean? You know confidence when you see it. So for example, Megan Smith is the former US CTO, and she first came to the Grace Hopper celebration in 2014, shortly after becoming the CTO, and she strutted out on that stage, and you knew that she was confident. That's what I mean. You know it when you see it. Not only did you know it when you saw Megan, but you can see her in the exhibit hall surrounded by women coming to hear her. That's the confidence. That's the confidence that she exudes and that attracts people to her. So how do you think about being confident? Because it's not so simple. One of the things that I would encourage you to think about is that as you reach for more, and as you think about becoming confident, you're going to be uncomfortable. It isn't going to feel right. It isn't going to feel like your normal way of doing things. And part of what is important is to learn to become comfortable being uncomfortable. That's just part of being confident. The other way that you can develop confidence is to find the right sponsors or advocates. These are people who believe in you. These are people who know that you can do something even when you don't know that you can do them. A sponsor is very different than a mentor, because a sponsor is somebody who is in meetings that you're not in, who makes recommendations about you for jobs that you don't even know exist. I'm writing a book right now, and I've interviewed a lot of executives, and every one of them had an advocate or sponsor, every one of them. And yet I did a survey about a year ago in the fall of 2021, and a fairly small percentage, about 13%, of the people who responded said that they had a sponsor or advocate. So there's a real discrepancy between those that are being successful and those that are starting out. So as my friend Nora says, it isn't who you know, it isn't what you know, it's who knows what you know. I'm going to talk a little bit about my own experience with mentors and sponsors. My most important sponsor was my PhD thesis advisor, a man named Carver Mead. And he was certainly there while I was writing my PhD thesis, and he encouraged confidence in me as as he talked about the science and how important it was to focus on the science. But that's not why he was my sponsor. He introduced me to somebody at the first 3 companies that I went to. So he had connections that were way outside my own network. And it was through him that I developed my career. You'll also notice that, not surprising, he's a man. And in fact, for many people, their most important sponsors or advocates are not the same gender or race as they are, because often the people in power and influence aren't. But they can still be your sponsor and mentor. Some of the other examples of people who are important to me is Valerie Taylor. Valerie is somebody I've known since the early days of the Grace Hopper celebration. She's the founder and CEO of something called Command It, the Center for Minorities and People with Disabilities, which Richard and I are both on the board. So Valerie's an academic, and so she uses me as an advisor as she grows this nonprofit because of my experience. But I go to Valerie because she knows she's very knowledgeable about underrepresented group, because that's what Command It is all about. So she gives me advice as I sort through various parts of the work that I do. Often this is called peer mentoring, and almost all of us have people that we've developed close relationships where both of you help each other. And it's really important. I would encourage you to think about who are the people who help you. And then last but not least, with Maria Klawe, who's now the president of Harvey Mudd College, and Bill Wolf, who's a former head of the National Academies. Both of them were board chairs for the organization, and they had my back when I had very difficult times when I was at the Anita Borg Institute. So to stop for a moment, and I would encourage you to reflect on who are your mentors, who are the people who you can really count on, and perhaps more importantly, who are your advocates, who are the people who can stand up for you in what you want to do. The next C is communication. You know, as a technologist, I loved creating technology. I loved creating products and delivering them. But as I was also an introvert, and one of the things that I learned, and was hard, is that communicating your idea is as important as developing the idea. So let me say that again because it's really important. Communicating your idea is just as important as developing the idea. And for those of us who are computing professionals or academics, sometimes that's very difficult to fathom, but it is true. One of the earliest times I ran straight into this was I was at a company called Actel, which was we made chips. And the CEO was a man named John East. He's a semiconductor guy, and he was a guy, white guy, although many of the founders of the organization were Egyptian, so they weren't all white guys, but they were all guys. And they all knew about making chips. For me, I sat at the boundary between building the hardware and building the software. And I was increasingly convinced that we should add this software to what we offered our customers, something called logic synthesis, for those of you who've been around for a while. And so I had 10 minutes on John's executive staff meeting to pitch my idea, because I needed money. And I spent a lot of time preparing. I had 10 minutes. I thought about the key outcomes, how much it would cost, and really spent a lot of time thinking about what this would look like. So I got up, I talked to John, I gave my pitch, and when I finished, there was dead silence. And then John said, "I don't get it." And I had not communicated to John or his staff the importance of doing this work. Now, in this case, he gave me the money anyway. He believed in me. But it is really common to get up in front of people and figure out how you're going to communicate this idea. And this was one of my earliest lessons about that. As the Anita Borg Institute grew, communication became an increasingly important part of my job. I had to get up in front of, 30,000 people and talk inspirationally. Okay, now we're going to be inspirational. But, but it became really important. And for many of you, thinking about how you develop your communication skills is something I would encourage you to think about. Because communication is a skill. And the way that you get better at it is to practice. I ask you to think about this. How do you communicate your ideas? And are you doing it effectively? Are you having the impact that you really want to have? And think about how you develop communication, how you develop those skills, and how you get better at it. So I was very committed to a career in working in Silicon Valley. Startups, this was my baby. My friend Anita Borg, after we created the Grace Hopper Celebration, which was a volunteer activity and was sort of my side hustle, and Anita founded a nonprofit. She really wanted to create something. She called it IWT, the Institute for Women in Technology. I was an advisor to her. I was supportive of what she was doing, and she tried to put it together. Anita was diagnosed with brain cancer very shortly after she had begun to build momentum with this organization. And she ultimately couldn't run it. She had to step down. Anita and the board asked me to take over as CEO. But you've got to understand that my whole identity was as a technologist. This was what I believed in. This was what I felt I was good at. And so, of course, I said no. And then I had to step back and think about it. Why was I saying no? And I decided, I talked it over with my husband. And by the way, one of the most important career decisions that you make is how you choose your partner or husband or wife, because that's the person that allows you to be successful and support you. And I decided to say yes. And so this was a giant pivot for me. Pivots are a really important part of most people's career. If you talk to many people, you will find that at some point in their career, they've made a pretty significant left turn. And that's what I did. I also realized that part of the reason that I was saying no and that I can't possibly do this is because I was scared. I didn't know how to run an organization. I didn't know what this job called a nonprofit CEO was. I was really scared that I was going to fail. But as we built momentum and tried to find funding and tried to survive, it really was a matter of survival. My curiosity, the community's curiosity, was a really important part of what we were doing. Candidly, the programs that were going on at the nonprofit were not sustainable. We had to they weren't working. So we had to take a step back and build it from scratch. And so that curiosity, what do you do for students? What can we do? Because there were many other organizations that were doing interesting and good work. What can we offer for industry professionals? What are other organizations doing? I mean, early in my tenure at what became the Anita Borg Institute, we talked to the people from NCWIT, and I became a co-founder of NCWIT. But NCWIT was doing very different work than what we wanted to do at the Institute, but we wanted to make sure we were complementary. The Society for Women Engineers had been around for 50 years, so we didn't want to reinvent what they were doing. We wanted to be able to work closely with them and found a way to be complementary. I mean, those are just two examples of organizations that during that early stage of what I would call curiosity, I thought about, we thought about. We built on the community. And it worked. This is just a brief history of what the Anita Borg Institute looked like. And I've already talked about the Grace Hopper celebration. Sisters was also a volunteer place that happened before it became part of the Anita Borg Institute. But much of the impact that we had wasn't direct impact. So several people, Valerie Taylor and several of her colleagues, founded the TAPIA Celebration of Diversity in Computing that was modeled on the Grace Hopper celebration. That happened in 2001. We started our first Grace Hopper in India in 2010. NCWIT was founded in 2004. And so bit by bit, we did more and we had more impact. You know, the top companies is a work that rewards, that measures companies of how well they're doing because they have to submit data. The partner program was a way to bring companies together where they could share practices. And then Valerie and Richard, I think, co-founded Commandit, which was modeled on the Anita Borg Institute. I still serve on the board of Commandit. So this was, once again, it was indirect impact, but it was certainly part of our journey as we grew in impact and size. Braid was a educational, did educational work. So there was a lot of work, some of which happened at the Anita Borg Institute. Some was influence in the wider community. Here's the thing that I don't talk about that often, is that there were many things that we tried as we looked with curiosity about what could happen. Some of my favorite programs, something called Tech Leaders, which were small workshops for women, just didn't work. We didn't have a sustainable model for what they could do. So as you're exploring this space and as you build that curiosity, you need to realize that some things will work and some things won't. And I ask you to take a minute and think about, where does your curiosity lead you? What can you do? And what would it take for you to reach for more? Some of us are naturally curious, and we're always trying something new. I was telling Jan earlier today that she's she's an inventor. She creates things from scratch. That's what she does. Some of us have a harder time really reaching for more. And so I would be honest with yourself about what your strengths are and how to build on the things that really might be a little hard for you. And then the last C is creativity. This picture, this is a warthog. You've probably seen them in The Lion King. And anteaters, they dig these tunnels and then they leave. And so the warthogs just takes them over. I figured that's one of the most creative things that you can do. So creativity comes in all shapes and sizes. I want to talk about one example that was important to me. I watched all these companies recruit all these amazing women from Grace Hopper. I mean, we had 350 companies that came to recruit. And yet, I heard from many of these women that went to these companies that it wasn't really a great place to be. And so part of what I hoped to do was to involve some of the technical executives, people who were running large organizations, to first of all convene in a place with 26,000 women, and then to share practices. So the inaugural forum was in 2008. In order to start it, I needed a certain number of CTOs or VP of engineering to be there. So I reached out to people I knew, and I had a plenary panel, so I invited them. I made them come to the conference. This is Sophie Brandenbrock, who was the CTO at Xerox, Greg Papadopoulos, who was the CTO at Sun at the time, when Sun existed, and Justin Ratner, who was the CTO at Intel. And they came, and then they also attended the Technical Executive Forum. Because I could say they were attending, we were able to invite all kinds of other people. And that first TEF, or Technical Executive Forum, we just sat in a big circle and we compared notes. We had a conversation. These are very senior people. They didn't want to be talked at. They wanted to participate in the conversation. And so it was successful enough that we kept up. Some of what we decided to do didn't work. For example, I thought, well, we've got all these students here. We've got all these CTOs. It seemed like a good idea to bring them together and have coffee. Well, that was a disaster because the students all wanted to know about the internships and the CTOs knew nothing about, about internships. So it was a mismatch of expectation. But it did meet a real need. And the Technical Executive Forum still exists at Hopper today. We also started in 2011 something called the Top Companies, where we asked companies to submit their data about how many people in their technical workforce were at the company. And then we compared them. I mean, most of it was anonymous, but it was actually, it was a great step forward. Not surprising, IBM won that first award, the first year. Here's the thing about companies, for those of you who are students. Companies vary widely in terms of their culture. If you're evaluating your job opportunities strictly based on the technical project you're going to be working on, you may find that it doesn't work for you. So it's important as you interview to really ask a lot of questions that helps you to understand what their culture is like. They're radically different. My friend Mary Lou Jepson, who's an inventor with 200 patents, she talks about, and she's an innovator. She's a revolutionary, actually. And she talks about how important it is to find creativity at the boundaries between disciplines. All too often, we often think of a discipline as going deep and knowing one area really well. But in fact, a lot of the creative ideas occur at the boundaries between discipline. In her case, electrical engineering, computing, and physics are the places where she brings them together. She's best known originally as the person who did the screen for the one laptop per child out of MIT. But she's gone on to work at Google and Facebook, and now is CEO of a startup that's really doing personal medical devices. I mean, she's an amazing innovator. And so I take what she has to say to heart. And I then ask you, do you find creativity in what you do? And if not, what can you do to increase your own creative juices? How can you get information that's outside your comfort zone and be able to reach for more? And then make it so. So my advice is courage, Find the courage to take risks, and then once you do, go for it. Develop the confidence to present your ideas. Develop effective communication for everything that you do. Embrace your own curiosity as you move forward, and ensure that creativity is at the center of all of your work. So, I'm going to switch gears a bit and talk about what organizations can do. I mean, you've got to understand that what I'm talking about here is how you can incorporate certain characteristics to have the career that you dream of. But one of the things that I know is that what you want to do is find cultures that encourage that. Cultures where communication is important for everybody in the room. Cultures that support courage and taking risks. Cultures that reward curiosity. So what can organizations do? I took, at the end of 2021, I did a survey of about 1,000 engineers and computer scientists to understand how they were experiencing their culture. The respondents to this survey were about half men, half women, and some other. They had a racial and ethnic mix of what's common in industry. You can read this, 68% white, 15% Asian, 5% Latinx or Hispanic, 3% black, 3% indigenous, and then other. About 12% of our respondents said that they had a disability. So these are the people who responded to the survey. We saw three things. One is that women are much more likely than men to feel like they don't fit into their organization. And you can see this in terms of feeling like you belong. About 68% of the men felt like they belong, and only 55% of the women. But here's the thing. There's something called intersectionality, which means that for some people, they are minorities across a couple of different axes. So a black woman, for example, is an underrepresented person, but also a woman. And often you see a double whammy when you find people who identify as intersectional. And so just looking at this data, about 63% of Asian women feel like they belong, but only 50% of the black women and 50% of Latinx women. And women with disabilities are even lower, 41%. So there's a real difference between what people experience. Okay, my screen disappeared, if anybody can change it. I'm fine, but my screen disappeared. Then we looked at who experienced inequities. And you can see this by gender. Certainly there's some difference between men and women. 46% of the respondents were women who said that they experienced gender inequity. If you look at people who are talking about racial inequities, you can see that it's significantly more. 48% of blacks that responded said that they face racial inequities. And if you look at the intersection of gender and race, it's even more dramatic. 56% of black women felt like they really experienced gender and racial inequity. So you can see that the responses, and this isn't a surprise, I mean, this is kind of what you would expect. But this just gives us the data to support that. The second thing is that men are much more confident than women that they know how to advance. What I know is it's really important to feel like you belong. Yes, that means that you stay. That's what I call retention. But in order for us to create the kind of change that I want to see, you want to have people from diverse backgrounds in positions of leadership. So hiring a whole bunch of people, a whole bunch of women, a whole bunch of blacks and Latinx, et cetera, at companies, if they all leave within the first 2 years, then what does it matter? But if you look at people who actually are advanced, that's what's important. And men are much more likely than women to believe they understand what it takes to advance. Here's the data, and you can see 52% of men feel like they know how to advance, whereas only 36% of women. And once again, looking at the racial breakdown, you can see for Latinx, 52% believe that they understand what it takes to advance. For people with disabilities, 44%. So there's a huge difference in terms of people who work at these broad array of companies and feeling like they know what it takes to advance. And then the last finding has to do with recruiting. And what I observed at the Grace Hopper celebration is that all these companies came to recruit, but then I would hear from the women that they would leave after a few years. And so as on the survey, we talked about both, do you see your company trying to recruit a diverse population? And then does it impact you? So it's not just you hear about these wonderful programs, does it make a difference to you in your group? And so first you see that about 63% saw their company recruiting. But this is just some of the responses, but they are a good indication of what we see. One of the respondents said, they try and recruit underrepresented minorities, but they want them to look exactly like all the people they used to recruit. They just are URMs, which is underrepresented minorities. A lot of the respondents talked about the fact that the companies seemed to be more of a feel-good kind of thing than really making a difference. And so as you think about where you go, who hires you, I would encourage you to know, can you look up and see people in leadership that look like you? Don't just hire them, keep them. Okay, so I want to talk just very briefly about what some companies are doing. Intel has a hotline, so you have an anonymous place to call and report a problem. GoDaddy, which is an interesting company, but some other time I'll talk about it. They were engaged with the Stanford Leadership Lab to help them understand their promotion practices and really made significant changes. I also believe it's really important to look at who's being promoted. So both Microsoft and Intel are looking at the fellows, and is there a pipeline so that people that might be fellows 5 years from now or 10 years from now, is there a pretty broad, diverse people in that pipeline? It's really important. ThoughtWorks has developed a leadership academy where they ensure that there's a pretty broadly diverse set of people that attend this leadership academy. They're global, so diversity takes on a huge meaning, a different meaning, if you're talking about a global population. So going back to my friend Mary Lou, imagine empowering people to do the best work of life in their life because they feel like there's no impediments. That's what I'm about. That's what really matters. How do you do that? For you, find the courage, develop the confidence, develop communication skills, engage your curiosity, and look at your own creativity. I believe that the technology that's changing our world will be better and more impactful if we have a diverse set of people who are involved, who are at the table creating that technology. Thank you.
open for questions. Yes, right there.
Thanks for the great talk. It's truly inspiring. I have one question I've been thinking about, perhaps especially at the current stage of my career, that I think it's really, in the long term, when you look back, I believe that the great work was done when you follow your curiosity, when you do truly creative work and when you take risks. But on the other hand, I also often feel the conflict that since in the short term, you need to meet your job requirements. You have to satisfy certain metrics, and perhaps you have to do some work not that interesting to you at the moment. And I don't know, what are your thoughts about this?
You know, in life, we actually do have things that we have to do because they're part of our job responsibilities or part of our commitment. And I mean, we all suffer from that. I think as you think about what you're doing, make sure that some of it is curiosity driven. It doesn't have to be everything, but find ways to be engaged. I mean, here's what I know. If you don't find ways to feel like you're making a contribution and pursuing your own curiosity, you probably aren't going to stay. I mean, we all need to feel like there's some satisfaction in the work that we're doing. So, I mean, there's times, so perhaps 10% of your time, you just think about interesting ideas, or find ways to put boundaries on it, but that you don't leave it. That's what I would say. Okay.
Thank you. Yes, right here.
I'm Hawa. I'm an undergrad, third year in computer science. So I have two questions. So the first is, which 3 African countries did you visit?
So actually 4. South Africa, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Botswana.
Oh, yeah, that's really cool. Okay, and my second question is, so like when it comes to taking risks, so like I take a lot of risks, but I don't really think of the consequences or weigh like decisions. So do you have any advice for like a decision-making framework? Like when you get an idea or like creativity, like how do you go about deciding whether to pursue it?
So the question is, how do you decide where to invest your time, and how, if you have a good idea, should you follow it? I do think it's important to develop a set of advisors, people that you can go to. So to talk about them. I mean, I mentioned some of the people that are part of my network where I can go and ask them for advice. But what I also find is that if I do a lot of research and I talk to people, I get ideas, I then have to go for a walk or do something that clears my mind. And often, at some point, I know what the answer is. I don't have to ask anymore. I know what it is. So listen to your own internal voice, too.
There's a question from Megan online, and I'm going to paraphrase it because the type is so small I can't read it. But she's asking, how do you include people that are not in the minority group, like men in the women situation, or white in the African American situation? So how do you include people that are in the majority group to be part of the pattern for advancement for the minority group?
Great question. So I think it's important to realize that if you're not part of a minority group, often there's a discomfort of where do I fit in here? And just recognize that that's what's going on. I think you want to name it. As a leader, so there's a couple of things. If you're a leader, like you've got a room full of people, you want to make sure that everybody has a chance to speak. And that's going to be some men, some women, some different groups. But it's about creating an inclusive culture where everybody has a voice. The reason that some of us focus more on underrepresented minorities is often in a room like that, they don't find their voice. And so as a leader, you need to make sure and call on them because they may be uncomfortable. Many of the women I know are just uncomfortable speaking up. I mean, I'll give you an example. I was on an advisory board at Caltech for many years, and I went to this advisory board meeting, and the two men in the room, the chair and the head of the department, were just having this animated conversation, and I watched this woman in the group try and say something 5 times, and they weren't consciously not letting her speak. They just were very animated about what they were doing. They were very good at it. And so I drew on my courage and I said, well, Janie wants to speak right now. And I don't think she liked it much, the fact that I called her out on it, but it was true. They were not letting her speak. So it's some of my most important mentors are men. You want to include them. You want to ask them afterwards, did this work? Did it not work? What could I do differently? So it's a learning kind of situation, and you're going to get it wrong. But you do want to include, inclusiveness is really including everyone.
Is there another question in the room?
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Leilani. I'm an assistant professor in Allen School. My question is about overcoming adversity, because this was an excellent talk, by the way. I had a lot of fun listening to it. I was curious about this intersection that you mentioned about being from an underrepresented group, but also following your curiosity, because oftentimes new ideas are faced with hostility, and it can take a really long time to convince people that that new idea is worth pursuing and worth listening to. So I wonder what your advice is for people who are coming from these groups where they're already facing a lot of challenges because they might be the only person in the room who looks like them. And then on top of this, they're coming up with transformative ideas that even if I was a white man would probably face a lot of hostility. It can be really, really hard. I would say disproportionately hard to stick with that idea. So what should we do in those situations?
Such a good question. The question was about if you are part of an underrepresented group, especially if you're intersectional, how do you speak up and talk about new ideas without facing extreme hostility? And I'd love to tell you that the hostility will go away. It won't. But there are a couple of techniques you can use. One is don't let it go. So speak your truth or speak and bring up this idea more than once, but also look at the group. So you really want to understand who is influential. So for example, you may sit in a group at the University of Washington and get some hostility, but then you can go afterwards and find people, many of whom are in this room, who may support your idea, but also may have influence with other people in that room. So develop, with influencers, develop people who are supporting your ideas. And it takes time. I mean, as you said, even if you were a white man, there's some ideas that are going to be met with a lot of resistance. So recognize that it's going to take time, but don't give up. Stick to your guns about realizing this is a transformative idea, and talk offline to as many people as you can and help to get them on the side. I mean, one of the techniques that I feel somewhat ambivalent, but I'll tell you anyway, is that get somebody, get a white man to suggest this idea at a future meeting. I mean, there's pros and cons with doing that, but if you're trying to get something moving forward, sometimes getting the right person on your side can be helpful in the long run. So techniques like that are possible.
There's one question online.
Okay.
Was about your study.
Yeah.
And it's from Salmon, and he asked, how did you choose those demographics? Did you find those particular demographics in the literature, or did you make them up yourself? Or?
So first of all, if you go to my website, tellywhitney.com, you can get a copy of the study. So it's there. I just reached out to the engineering and computing workforce, and I mean, the hard part was finding groups that would distribute the survey. So people that distribute it, you know, Anita Borg, the Command It. I mean, there's a list of about 8 different organizations that distributed it to their community. No, I didn't choose that. I was really hoping to get more people from more underrepresented groups. And in fact, I left it open for months as I tried to extend my reach. But just naturally, I mean, IEEE actually sent it out. Just naturally, it came back half men, half women, which I was happy about.
I was going to ask a question too, because when you talked about belonging, the Data Buddies program at the CRA also did a belonging study, and they did it intersectionally as well. And their data is very similar to your data. So not only is it in companies, and the Data Buddies study is undergraduates at many universities, including ours here. And so the same feeling among women, among people with disabilities, and so on, their feeling of belonging is a lot less than white male. So it's not something, you know, universities can do something about it to improve that situation.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I decided to do this, at some level, I mean, there wasn't a lot of surprising results. I knew a lot of it, but it gave me the data to be able to talk about it. That's really what I was after, and it's been helpful.
I think, you know, this is more of a comment, but I think the culture in the university is related to the culture in companies in the tech field. And so we have an obligation to improve our culture as well.
Yes, so I agree with that. You heard him say that, and it's really important. I do think that focusing on a culture of inclusiveness at University of Washington, which everything I've heard, it's actually better than most universities. I should tell you that, but it is important.
We have time for one last question, if there is one. So let's thank Telly for a wonderful presentation.